here talking the Green Bay Packers in a Week 7 matchup. Let's get it on. What's up, everybody? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful Saturday morning here. Thank you guys for joining us and checking out this Week 7 preview. I'm here joined with my full press coverage brethren right here, my boy Kyle Senra. How you doing today, sir?
Hey, George. This is awesome. And I hope, looking forward to, what maybe would have thought of as a blowout game actually probably looks like a close game this week. So good, exciting football game. That'll be fun for everyone and not stressful at all.
Ideally and hopefully. So Kyle Senra is the host of the Full Press Packers handle, website, podcast, all things Full Press Packers over there. He also oversees a Full Press Fantasy podcast as well, where I definitely join in and we chime in together every Sunday. It's a lot of fun. So Kyle, I just want to touch base. Just want to hear your perspective on the actual Green Bay Packers. So it's been pretty crazy. Obviously the Green Bay Packers, 13-3 the past couple of years, a lot of optimism, especially with Aaron Rodgers at your quarterback. But last week they dropped to 3-3 after losing to both New York teams, 27-10 loss to the Jets, which was definitely surprising in my perspective. What's the narrative coming out of Green Bay? What are your thoughts? And, is it code red over there? What's going on?
Yeah, certainly not code green, green and gold, the gold standard that the Packers have kind of operated at, certainly the last, really every year of the Matt LaFleur regime seems to be crumbling a little bit. Been talking about it on recent episodes of the Full Press Packers podcast. This is probably the least amount of faith I've had in this coaching staff. So
interesting.
I think it is closer to full-blown panic than it is to everything's green and rosy. Now, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Frankly, this will be a big test for that against Washington. Now that, 2 straight losses to New York teams, which entering the season, I don't think many people are picking either, let alone both to make the playoffs. Both have winning records. I mean, certainly look at the Giants. I mean, they just took down the Ravens. So, they're 5-1. The Jets are 4-2. And yeah, if the Packers beat the Jets, they're not above 500. But certainly the Giants, they're winning games often. Not the same for Washington. So I think the panic isn't there yet because of how what those teams' records are. If Green Bay loses to Washington, knowing that they played the Bills the very next week, then it's full-blown panic. Then it's, probably looking at 3-5. And I know there'll be a game against the Vikings, and they looked atrocious against them. And if they can't beat a 1-win Washington team. Oh, no, 2 wins. You got the Bears.
2 wins.
And to be fair, that's probably a win for the Packers later in the season. They could bank against the Bears.
I agree.
But, playing the Vikings again, that's probably already 6 losses. And, there's still the Cowboys, the Eagles who haven't lost. They're going to have a tough schedule. So they really can't afford to drop this one to Washington. Honestly, I'm almost calling it a must win for Green Bay if they really certainly want to compete as, division titles for the NFC North. But I think right now, all it is just playoffs. Doesn't matter if it's wild card, which is probably their more likely chance. We'll see how the Vikings fare down the stretch because they're another 5-1 team. So already off to a hot start with 1 win in hand against Green Bay. It's that division title's already kind of slipping away pretty drastically. Well, even if they win here this week, it's still going to be quite an uphill battle. So a loss this week really kind of hurts their playoff chances. I think huge. So I'd call it close to a must win as you could Week 7. That's not usually the time to say must win, but it feels like it for Green Bay right now.
No, I totally see the same perspective you do. I actually tweeted right before the show. They do have the Eagles and the Cowboys upcoming. I'm talking about the Packers, Buffalo Bills next week. It definitely is some dire straits for you guys. What do you attest though? What's going on in Green Bay? Do you think it's just the loss of Devontae Adams? Is that too hard to overcome? Does Aaron Rodgers feel uncomfortable in this system? Is there some like fission between Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers? What's going on in Green Bay? Why is there a division right now? Why is there tension? Why are they struggling?
Well, personnel, I think is first and foremost the players on the field. So you nailed it. Losing Devontae Adams is really been catastrophic to this passing game. And there was the thought that Aaron Rodgers has been so good. I mean, I've talked before about all-time quarterback rankings. I think he's certainly a top 100%. 10, borderline on the top 5. I think I had him at 6 on the last time Jesse and I did those rankings last year. My co-host on the Full Press Packers pod, but figured that his talent could kind of overcome the loss of Adams and keep it afloat. It seems like it hasn't been able to. There's been a lot of times I think a lot of the receivers struggling to get open.
Yeah.
Now, Randall Cobb certainly saw it against the Giants game. He got, I think, 13 targets. Last week got hurt pretty early, so that was also kind of a, that's a, at this point, this point of Cobb's career, you wouldn't say like, oh, losing him would be devastating to the offense, but it almost really is. We saw Robert Tonyan get a ton of targets, so tight end will be a big storyline, I think, for both teams this week. And I think Romeo Doubs is probably the best at getting separation right now, but I don't know that Rodgers necessarily trusts him. Seems like he's got really good hands. Like that's the one thing. He's made some tough catches, and he is a hands catcher, not a body catcher, compared to, let's say, the other rookie Christian Watson, who it seems like he tries to cradle it in a little too much. I know that's kind of, Rodgers seems to have like almost no confidence in him. He'll be out this week, so that won't factor in anyway. But yeah, I think just overall lack of confidence in the receivers getting open, making plays. Like I think all of Lazard's catches last week were incredible. Like he'd have to like contort his body, ball in really tough spots, really strong hands to make those catches. And I don't know, it seems like Doubs showed some good things earlier in the season, and Rodgers seemed to trust him to a certain extent, but then last couple weeks that's kind of gone away. So I'd expect, certainly with, last week Cobb got hurt early in the game, but he was still probably an integral part of that game plan, and they just kind of couldn't replace him. We saw Amari Rodgers get on the field a lot, and that's frankly not really a good sign on offense. I don't know that it's great on special teams, which is basically where he sticks at as a returner, but he's functional there. I don't know, offense. There's a reason that the two rookies this year were already like leaps and bounds ahead of him, getting on the even Christian Watson, as much as his development, he missed a lot of training camp. He's played way more snaps on offense than Amari Rodgers. So it's that clearly he was behind the two rookies this year, especially the one rookie who went to a small school at North Dakota State and missed a lot of training camp, and he came on and immediately was playing ahead of him. So not a good sign for Amari Rodgers, I don't think. And so not a good sign when he's on the field as much as he is. But I think this week going in, they have to integrate Doubs into the game plan. I think that's huge.
Gotcha.
Because I think he really can be that number one receiver for them. I think he's better at getting separation than Lazard. And maybe Lazard's still, like, they both have really good, strong hands. Like I mentioned, that good hands catchers, good contested catch guys. But I feel like Doubs has shown signs to be that number one guy. And I think it does come down to Rodgers trusting him. But I think overall, one of the things I've laid the blame on a lot is the coaching staff. And we can get into that in a little bit. But if you want to chime in, and I don't want to monopolize your show.
No, you're good. You're good. So basically, the next few questions, one of them was going to be about the coaching. So just touch on this one quickly, if you don't mind. Then we'll pivot to coaching. So you just talked about offense, right? So last week, the Packers had their lowest output of the season with 278 yards. Do you think that is more so of the Jets defense stepping up to the plate, or do you think it was more just like lack of efficiency and Randall Cobb kind of throwing things in a tailspin? What do you think happened last week?
Well, yeah, I think if your offense is struggling, and part of it is going to be good going against a good defense, unless sometimes such a bad offense can make a bad defense look good. But I did really feel like the Jets were executing kind of on all cylinders on both sides of the ball. But Ahmad Gardner, two cornerbacks going 3 and 4 overall in the draft. You don't tend to see that often, and it seems like recent cases, like you've had, Jalen Ramsey, I think, was a top 5 pick. That turned out great. Even though Jacksonville traded him away and he won a Super Bowl elsewhere, he gave some good years to them. So even like that team kind of still got a good return on investment there.
Yep.
Jeff Okudah for the Lions, which is, again, as a Packers fan, I don't mind seeing them fail on picks. That one so far hasn't turned out. I mean, injuries have impacted that, but even before he was injured, it seemed like he didn't come in and was the immediate shutdown corner like Ramsey, right from like week 1 as a rookie. It seemed like he came in and was at least above average as a corner. And by the end of his rookie season eventually became an all-pro, I don't think as a rookie, but certainly within the next couple of years. But yeah, it seems like Ahmad Gardner was the right pick there. We'll see about the Texans pick of I forgot his name.
I don't have it in front of me right now. Who was it? It was I'll pull it up.
They were both considered, like, I remember top 10 picks kind of like projected, right? And it was like who was going to go first, but I kind of thought,
I know you're talking about Derek Stingley, right?
Yes. It seemed like Gardner was kind of more viewed as the number one. So I was a little surprised to see Stingley go first. And it seems like the Jets almost made the no-brainer pick at that point of Gardner. If they were thinking corner, maybe they were hesitant on Stingley being the number 2 in the draft, which they go another position. They were probably like, okay, yeah, Gardner fell into their lap. And he really shut down Lazard. Like I said, Lazard had like 2 or 3 catches, and they were all like really difficult sideline grabs, like really like perfect ball placement by Rodgers. And that's kind of what it forced. Like he was just really shutting down the game. And then there was the first or second play of the game, he had a pick 6 that it was a tip ball, and it did land on the ground partially. Like even that one seemed scary. Like so, like right away, that like this could have been even worse. Honestly, the Packers kind of got bailed out maybe a little bit on that one. It seemed like it was the right call to say it was incomplete, but that could have just easily been an extra 7 points right there and right off the bat. So the fact that it was 3-3 at halftime showed the defense was playing well, but yeah, the offense definitely really struggled, and the offensive line, I think, for the Packers really struggled. Quinn and Williams just they had no answer for him. I think that the strength of the Packers line is the exterior. Their tackles are better than the interior, but I also think the inside. I think all three of the interior players really struggled. Runyon had. I know John Runyon talked about he felt like he had his worst game as a pro, and he's been pretty solid for them the last 2 years at left guard. And he was a 6th round pick, like not necessarily expected to. He didn't start week 1 as a rookie, but I think he started 13 games his rookie year at left guard. He looked decent, like above average. And the 4th round pick rookie Newman last year, not so good. Like he started week 1 at right guard, just like he did this year. And it kind of feels like in both instances, he's been the weakest link of the line, and maybe there's a move to be made. I know Jesse and I, again, Jesse Hall, we were talking about on the previous podcast episode, what could they do there? And there are really 2 options. Elton Jenkins is great. Obviously, he was an can't remember if he won an all-pro, and I don't think he did. I think he got snubbed, but he's played basically at an all-pro level at a guard. He's done pretty good as a tackle as well. Now, the tackle spurts a lot. Was last year at left tackle before he tore his ACL, and then this year coming back from the torn ACL at right tackle. But there's the talk of getting Josh Nijman, who's been with the Packers for a while, but has mostly been used as like the backup left tackle. They don't really use him anywhere else.
More swing position or something.
Yeah, it's really just if they need a left tackle, he's good for there, but they've never used him at the right tackle. And there's maybe talk that do they try to get him on the line? It seems like it's one of those where not everyone can swing both sides well. Like some players are designated like swing tackle because they can play both positions well. Some guys do struggle on one side. Like I think Elton Jenkins is a good example. Like you put him anywhere on the offensive line, he'll play great. I know this year he's taking more penalties than usual, giving up more sacks. I also maybe think it's coming back from the torn ACL. That happened. I think it happened last October. So he's basically at a year removed from that now. So now is, now moving forward is when I'd expect to kind of see him back to his old self. But maybe as a way to help that, do they put him inside at guard and get Josh Nijman at right tackle? So I think that maybe is more about, can Nijman play on the right side? Because it seems like, again, Jenkins, he can do, played left tackle last year, right tackle. Like he's started games at I think all 5 positions on the offensive line. And he's still on his rookie contract. This is year 3 or 4 for him. So he's like he's an example of a player that can kind of play everywhere. And Josh Nijman's almost maybe the opposite, but that could be an option. This year they drafted a couple rookies as well. Zach Tom, and this is Jesse and I think this is what they should do, is just play Zach Tom at right guard.
Okay.
The only time we've seen Zach Tom this year was when John Runyon got hurt and he replaced him at left guard, because there was a game where they had to replace Newman at right guard and Jake Hansen came in. It's funny, Jake Hansen I think was drafted, might have been the pick after Runyon, I remember they picked like 3 offensive linemen in the span of like 10 picks in the 6th round that year. And Hansen's really struggled. Like he's someone I think is worse than Royce Newman, which is why Newman's starting there. Jake Hansen's out this week. So if the Packers really want to look elsewhere than Royce Newman at right guard, they kind of don't have a choice but to put Zach Tom in. We're almost hoping, like, do they do that by design? Like something has to change, I think. And that seems like that's the easiest way to get changes, because like I said, the entire interior struggled. Both guards struggled, but we've seen Runyon not like that seemed like more like an outlier game from John Runyon. So we expect him to bounce back. Newman, this has kind of been his whole career. He's good at run blocking. He can get out in space. He's physical. Pass protection, though, he's kind of a liability. He has a hard time. Like last week, it was all like, and they mentioned on the broadcast, it was all about the stunts. Just have Quinn and Williams and the other defensive tackle play stunts, and Royce Newman couldn't keep up. And so that would always be kind of the weak part of the line. And sometimes Elton Jenkins had to like overcompensate and help him, and then that would leave someone off the edge more exposed. So I think that's probably the easiest solution answer. Just put Zach Tom in. I know my co-host Jesse agrees. So we'll see what the alignment is. And this, again, without Jake Hansen there to kind of use as that extra guard, this is the week to do it if you're going to do it, I think. So we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of things you touched upon, I kind of was doing research as well and kind of figured it. We have an awesome former tight end named Logan Paulson. He's played for the Falcons, the Bears, the Redskins, when they were called the Redskins a couple of years ago. He actually does some great roster breakdowns and film breakdowns. He was talking about how the guards even admitted that they, for the Packers, struggle to help out with the stunts. So that does seem like if there was a potential advantage for Washington, it would be right there because of Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen, which are pretty strong assets there. So we'll kind of talk about that matchup later on in the podcast. So thank you for touching on that. Let's talk about this. So definitely, this is more of a national story. I don't know if it's more of a local story or something that you have your ear to the ground on. But Matt LaFleur, okay, so Matt LaFleur in Green Bay, there seems to be some tension with Aaron Rodgers. Do you believe that to be true? Do you think that they do not coexist very well, or what's your perception on that?
A certain point, like the boy cried wolf, because people have been saying this since LaFleur arrived there. So you hear it, and I just kind of take it with a grain of salt naturally. But you do listen to some of the things said in the press conferences, and there maybe there is like looking like they're maybe not seeing eye to eye entirely. I don't think it's that they can't coexist together. I mean, I think again, I still test. If you asked Rodgers, like, okay, Matt LaFleur, do you want to go back to Mike McCarthy? I think he'd be okay, Matt LaFleur. Like, I think he'd very clearly much prefer it.
Yeah.
But Rodgers talked about simplifying the offense. I don't think it's for himself necessarily. I think it's because
wide receivers and the youth.
Well, and maybe also offensive line. Maybe are some of the ways they protect too complicated, and that's like guys like Royce Newman, for instance. We keep singling him out, but is he thinking too much instead of reacting? Instincts, right? Like they have to kind of know the game, and maybe even like Dubs. Is that maybe something that's why he's still not trusting Dubs? Like, yeah, he can get open fairly often, but there's times where he's maybe not at key moments, and then it's tough to, or he's maybe he gets open eventually, but it's the delay, it's the timing aspect is super important for Aaron Rodgers. He's incredibly accurate, but it's also part of it is throwing things on time, and which again is why Randall Cobb's been getting so many targets recently. Or like I think last week with Robert Tonyan, it was the Jets were kind of taking away everything deep. The corners are so great, maybe a little more exposure over the middle, and he would just have to kind of dump it off, and it's sort of easy throws. And I think he probably trusts Tonyan to kind of run, and I know he's also, just like Elton Jenkins mentioned earlier, coming off a torn ACL from last year. I know Rodgers has mentioned this as well. He's still, there's another gear. He's yet to hit it, but it's also, he's again, it's at right around the same time. So he's kind of just getting at that point where he's a year removed from it. So expect both, just like I said with Elton Jenkins, also Robert Tonyan, to get better as the season goes on and as they're getting more strength on that knee.
Gotcha. Okay. So just talking about that. So I guess let's talk about the injury report, right? So I want to pull that up really quickly. I haven't had a chance to dive deep into it right now, but we can look at it together. Let me share it for our listeners and our followers over here. Give me 1 second. Let me stop this one and let me find this one. So I'm looking. I believe Washington does have a couple of notable people that are out this week, and I'll pull that up right now. Let's take a look at it. So going through Washington's people that are listed out: Diami Brown, William Jackson III. Just for the Green Bay listeners, so William Jackson III was our big cornerback splash signing a couple of years ago. Let me actually pull it up all the way. Sorry.
Jesse wanted him so bad. We talked about him off in that free agency period. So the Full Press Packers listeners are certainly familiar with that name and how we kind of struck out on that. And Curtis Samuel wanted both, and you guys got them both. So that was.
I'm happy with Curtis Samuel. So William Jackson, I was actually really excited to get. He was a PFF darling. He had his an elite rookie year, or maybe sophomore year. One of his first 2 years in the league had a 30% completion rate, less than a couple 200 yards of receptions, receiving yards all year long. He's supposed to be an elite man corner, and the thought that was that we could basically, if you're an elite man corner, you can translate that into the zone defense. That's what Washington primarily runs. And he just struggled to, to basically assimilate and struggle to work with his counterparts. So basically what happened is, I don't know if you know this yet, Kyle, is there's a kind of a ghost back injury going on in DC, where basically William Jackson says, I can't play because of my back. And Ron Rivera says, we benched him after the first half. So it's kind of like a little disconnect between the two people. I think it might be coming to a point where on November 1st, he might be traded or cut to kind of be relieved from the books. But William Jackson is going to be out again this week. Benjamin St-Juste is basically running outside of the boundary corner. He's done a really good job. He's a big, oversized corner at 6'2", 215 pounds, something along that lines. He did a good job against A.J. Brown, so I'd expect him to kind of maybe roll with Alan Lazard or Romeo Dubes as well. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, we have Diami Brown out, William Jackson out, Logan Thomas out. Obviously, Carson Wentz is out, so we'll talk about Taylor Heineke this week. And in regard to Sam Cosby and John Bates and Jahan Dotson, those are all pretty integral parts of our team. Jahan Dotson's our starting slot wide receiver, Sam Cosby's our starting right tackle, and John Bates is our backup tight end. So if he doesn't play this week, it is definitely something to note. And before I toss it over to you, Packers listeners, John Bates is a formidable possession tight end. He can catch the ball pretty well. But, when John Bates is typically on the field, that means Washington's going to run. He's their best run blocking tight end. So just got to keep that in mind. So, I don't know if you can actually see this pretty clearly on your screen, Kyle, but is there any people out of note for you?
Well, yeah. So for the Packers, already talked on Randall Cobb. It's an ankle injury, and I mean that seems like that's going to be, more than a month as opposed to less than a month. If it's not 4 weeks exactly. I know that they haven't put him on IR yet. It seems like they probably won't. Kind of hope they're maybe hopeful he comes back before the month period, and that's why they're not putting him on IR.
Yeah,
but they haven't really. They just said ankle. They haven't said high ankle or low ankle sprain, but I guess maybe that's the confusion on if it was a high ankle sprain, maybe he would already be on IR. So maybe that's hopeful that it might not be a month, but yeah, he'll be out this week. And then I already mentioned Christian Watson's out, and then Sammy Watkins also on injured reserve. So that's 3 of your top 5 receivers. That probably puts Amari Rodgers on the field more. Juwan Winfrey as well. Now he's seen limited opportunities this year, and it's funny because that's someone that Rodgers has seemed to kind of in training camp kind of talk up the former. This has been kind of a more national exposure than I think, but talking about like, oh, he likes Kumro, oh, we'll cut him. Oh, he likes Winfrey, oh, send him to the practice squad. But
okay, that's
when
funny.
He's been targeted this year, he's had a lot of drops, and it hasn't been a good catch rate, so he's kind of struggled. But maybe that's something that he needs to just be playing more, and like it's because he's played so little that given those opportunities, it kind of I've heard people talk about this. If you're only going to get like this many snaps in just this game, you maybe put extra pressure on yourself, and that's maybe like what happened to Christian Watson. I think everyone saw week 1, second place in scrimmage for Green Bay, a deep pass to Christian Watson, and he did his best Marquez Valdez-Scantling impersonation and dropped it. Alligator arm dropped it. It looked like MVS on it, just wide open. Oh, great, that's great. And then the catching part not so great.
That's funny because Christian Watson.
If you look at the cap hits of those two players this year, you'd rather pay Watson what he's getting than MVS. He just wouldn't have maybe wanted to trade up and take him in the second round. But so I think that's the big one. And then I already mentioned Jake Hansen being out. So those are like really the only 3 players that are out. I guess if you look at the injury report, the interesting name that kind of stands. I mean, like I think Aaron Rodgers' thumb injury was talked about. Obviously, quarterback is huge, but Elton Jenkins again with the knee injury. Again, this is still just, I think, not a new injury. This is just still recovering from that ACL tear, but limited, and he's been mostly a limited practice participant all year. Didn't practice Friday, but he also doesn't have a game stat. Like he's not questionable going into the week, it looks like. So it seems like he's going to play, and maybe the Friday was just a veteran rest day. Maybe the knee was just needed an extra day of rest, so they just don't bother. We know you're set. Like, I don't know. We'll see. Or maybe is maybe that this is there kind of a thought he'll be active. Like he'll be active, no doubt, but maybe he doesn't necessarily play 100% of the snaps. They've done that with David Bakhtiari this year, actually, where they've played Josh Nijman for an entire series at a time.
I've heard that actually.
I kind of. Because to me, even though Bach and he's like so his injury dates back a little longer. He tore his ACL December 2020, but last year he needed an extra surgery. There's like a lot of fluid buildup and like stuff that maybe didn't get fully repaired. So he hasn't. So he missed basically all of last year. He played what I thought mistakenly played a meaningless week 17 game with the thought of, he uses a tune-up game to get him ready for the playoffs, and he wasn't ready, so they didn't even play the playoffs because he kind of aggravated it and then had to take the year off. So that was a kind of mistake there. And so I think this year they're taking the extra cautious approach. He didn't play right from week 1. It took a couple weeks to get in, and then now that he's still not playing 100% of the snaps. But even so, I think he clearly looks like the best offensive lineman on the team. So I know he's not too happy coming out. Like he's kind of mentioned like he'd rather just play all the snaps. Like he feels like he's fine and ready to. I think And again, with the injury to Jake Hansen, you got less depth, and who knows what you're doing with Royce Newman. I think they may not have a choice but to just play him 100%. Like the limitations, I think now are done. There was the London trip, so that maybe complicated things. Now you're back, you're established. Last week was a game in North America, same as this week. So you kind of just, now it's normal. Now it's just a normal football season for him. So I'd imagine he plays all the snaps, and unless it's a blowout either way. Because you can't write out Washington blowing out the Packers, because
I don't know about all that.
Good enough to say that you can't say that.
All right, well, let's pivot real quick. So let's talk about the offense real quick, right? So I want to dive into this, talk about the defense, and talk about the game prediction. So let's talk about Aaron Rodgers. So national narrative, right? National narrative is that he is supposedly struggling this season, right? He has 9 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. It doesn't sound like he's struggling too much, right? However, he's been sacked 15 times. There's a sack pressure rate of 5.6% on all of his dropbacks. So there is some sort of, protection issues in regard to, how much time he has back there. What are you seeing? What is your honest assessment? Is Aaron Rodgers struggling? If he is, why is he? If not, why not? Let me hear what your perspective is right there.
Yes, it all depends relatively to like what standard are you talking about? Like, did you mention 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions? That's a lot of quarterbacks would love to have that, right? So if you're talking from an NFL average quarterback standpoint, he's definitely not struggling, and he's great. I mean, last week it seemed like the hand injury was affecting him a little bit. Maybe the passes weren't as crisp, and that's maybe why he was looking so much to the open guy in Tunyon so much. He didn't necessarily want to throw too many tight window passes until like they were. Certainly it started in the third quarter where they were down. They didn't really have a choice. Then I'll throw to Lazard deep, throw to some dangerous areas where he just doesn't have a choice but to do it. But it seemed like a lot of times, maybe not necessarily trusting the full velocity of his throws. Okay, I'll go to the open check down, and be nice to use Aaron Jones more in that regard.
Exactly. We're talking about him next.
But yeah, I think the receivers have struggled relative to previous years. I think the offensive line has struggled relative to previous years. So, and naturally Rodgers, I don't think he's playing an MVP level like he did literally the last 2 years as 2-time MVP. And, you can argue the validity really of both. Maybe Josh Allen or Tom Brady, I think, were the names that could have won either of those. But the fact that he played at that level to win them shows how good he of the standard he is. And like entering the season, I thought he was still one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the NFL.
Oh, 100%.
Mahomes, Brady, and him, I think, were okay. These are, they're all champions. They've all been at certain points of their career the best, I think, and so you kind of.
I think he's up there. I put Josh Allen up there now too. Though Josh Allen,
and that's the one thing, and maybe especially highlighting a Bills preview next week.
Yeah,
I think I'd give the quarterback edge to Josh Allen. To be honest, so
Josh is on fire right now.
Rodgers probably is still one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. Maybe he's just not one of the 3 best quarterbacks in the NFL anymore. And so if from that regard, from his standard that he set, he's struggling based on what we've seen of him and what we've come to expect of him.
Gotcha. Okay. So we kind of talked about that. We talked about, Devontae Adams leaving. We're talking about Alan Lazard having a tough time carrying an offense on his own. He's looking for number 2 with Romeo Dubes. Hopefully he kind of steps up this week. Let's talk about Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. So I think honestly, Aaron Jones is probably the most explosive, dynamic player on your offense, in my opinion. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
100%.
Okay. So I think Aaron,
I think it's funny.
Let me say one thing.
Back to Curtis Samuel, right? Like, I know you're really happy with Curtis Samuel on Washington. Almost that same regard. Explosive, whether it's downfield or after the catch, underneath stuff, and he can. I mean, we've even seen Curtis Samuel's career line up in the backfield and run the football. Aaron Jones has exactly that, and they kind of, when they signed Aaron Jones to his current contract extension, it seemed like it was really that. Like, okay, they could have gone out and paid a receiver like Samuel, but if they're going to use Aaron Jones enough as a receiver, then that justifies that kind of money payment.
I agree. So he's more of an offensive weapon. So so let's touch on that though real quick, right? So I think he's an offensive weapon as opposed to a running back. But it's funny, I have Aaron Jones on my fantasy teams, 2 of them, and I love Aaron Jones. However, it seems like sometimes he thrives, sometimes he's lost in the mix, right? And it's actually kind of funny looking at the actual rushing touches. AJ Dillon actually has 73 on the season, while Aaron Jones has 70. So it's a fair balance, but AJ Dillon has more of the tip. And then Aaron Jones has about 20 targets in regard to reception. Like, do you think Aaron Jones is being utilized enough? From your inflection of your voice, I'm thinking no. I think you want to get more involved. But so what's going on there? Do you think why isn't Aaron Jones being used more? Do you think he should be being used more? And what's the dynamic between him and AJ Dillon?
That's because that's been the talk too in Green Bay in the media is Matt LaFleur. Every game is almost asked that. Why didn't you use Aaron Jones enough by the media? Almost every single game this year. Yeah, you're right. We didn't use him enough. We'll do that next game, and they don't. So I don't know. There really is no logical reason to not use him more, and I'm okay with AJ Dillon even getting more carries than Aaron Jones, and I think it's the value of when the touches are and like where they are in the field, but also you mentioned targets, right? The fact that there are, I think it's 4 players with more targets than Aaron Jones, 5 more than AJ Dillon. The fact that like they're close in receiving,
I saw that.
I think AJ Dillon's a capable receiving back, but I think Aaron Jones really is one of the best in the league at it. And
I definitely agree with that. Maybe Dalvin Cook or McCaffrey. Targets,
compared to Dubs has 38. Allen Lazard at 34, Tunyon 32, and Cobb 26. Like he should be, because really, like he's been, I think every year of Matt LaFleur era, Aaron Jones has been second on the team in receptions behind only Adams. So he's been catching more passes. Even like Tunyon's breakout year, we had 11 touchdowns. Jones had more catches, and it was more targets, more catches. Like just like they were really close in catches. But Jones had significantly more targets because Tunyon's catch rate that year was ridiculous. It was.
And Kyle, real quick, sorry to interrupt you. So, it sounds like is it fair to say the Packers want to run their offense from the inside out? Like in years past, they just kind of force feed Devontae Adams. And I think Devontae Adams had like 169 targets last year, so like almost 10 a game, right? So taking that away definitely shapes fixes the dynamic or changes the dynamic of your offense. Do you think this year's 2022 version of the Packers is more of like we want to run the ball, we want to get to Allen Lazard, but then if we don't did it to either one of them, we're going to check down to a running back? Is that fair to say, or you don't think so?
Well, I think I like the way you're saying inside out. They want to be running inside and then using that to kind of pass more. And that was kind of the big question when Matt LaFleur got there. Okay. Aaron Rodgers, he'll set up the run game by passing so much. So, pass early often, and then you can run later. But with Matt LaFleur, it does almost seem like we saw when he was offensive coordinator and play caller in Tennessee, because he was the offensive coordinator with the Rams for a year, but that's still McVay calling the play. So it's tough to say it's his offense. But the year he was in Tennessee and got to run his offense, that's when they really started to unlock Derrick Henry. Before it was, okay, Derrick Henry using a committee, whether it was with I guess it was DeMarco Murray the first year, and really that wasn't so much a committee as Henry was very clearly the backup. And then like there was the Dion Lewis committee, and it seemed like that before they started to really kind of when the King Henry time kind of started. And I think once LaFleur left is when he really started to emerge. But that idea of he wants to run a lot and then use the run game to set up the passing later. So it is in a sense, I get the kind of narrative of the philosophical opposition that LaFleur and Rodgers have there. But I think whereas in the past, I think they have defaulted to more what Rodgers wants to do. Like LaFleur is kind of,
he realizes
he wants to use a lot of the motion. He's got his systems that he wants to run, his blocking scheme. But how do I incorporate that into like Aaron Rodgers' offensive philosophy? I think they did do a good job of that. I think people really made a lot of that in his first year. And there's tons of drama in training camp, and Rodgers had kind of meant, like one of the first days of OTAs that year mentioned something about how complicated it was and how he was still having to learn it. And it was a challenge, and people like really misconstrued that to kind of be like, oh, he doesn't like it and blah, blah. But it seems like everything we know about Rodgers, he's kind of
more reflective, and but go ahead.
Really, he kind of likes the complicated things and kind of out there
he's
thinking.
So kind of guy. I agree.
There was a ton of drama created from that, but it seems like they fused it really well. And now maybe this is LaFleur pushing back this year and saying, no, we are going to go more towards a run-heavy approach. And it's going to be that to then set up your passing later. We're not going to pass as much early often. And I think what that's causing is when they do start to call the pass plays a lot, Rodgers just wants to go deep every time because they feel like they need to be really efficient every time he throws it. And then when we saw last week is they just really couldn't. So he had to dump down to Tunyon and that didn't necessarily work any better. Like you said, they only scored 10 points. It was their lowest, and yards wise, there was the lowest offensive output. But it seems like what's also happening is that a lot of times run plays are called, and if Rodgers doesn't like the look, audibles out to a pass play off it, which any veteran quarterback at this point, that's what they'll be doing. So that's not necessarily a controversial thing. I know, again, people seem to like create more drama about that than
always.
But
it's more fun to get the clicks for that. Exactly right. I agree with that.
But again, the idea of when Rodgers said maybe we should simplify the offense, LaFleur was later asked about Rodgers saying that, and he says, "I'm not sure what that means." Like he's
Yeah,
kind of like it's already at its most simple. Like I can't
I
simplify this
caught
any
that. I
further.
caught
So
that.
that's maybe the one thing that's been said about this that kind of scares me the most is where the divide might be there. I think LaFleur thinks he's pushing it to the simplest extreme, and Rodgers thinks it can go further.
Mm-hmm.
And I think again, it's all just to help out either the receivers and maybe the offensive line as well. But yeah, so I don't know. But I think the one thing that could help no matter what is just getting Aaron Jones more involved in the passing game. And I still think Aaron Jones, as much as you see AJ Dillon, just like his freakish size and his speed for his size is incredible. Aaron Jones to me is still the better goal line back,
Oh,
short yardage running
interesting.
back.
Okay.
He's got
Okay.
the better burst and instincts to follow his blocks. He's got the nose for the end zone. I think that's why he's had so much touchdown success. But what we're seeing, and you've mentioned it fantasy wise, is he's not getting the first crack anymore at the goal line stuff. It seems like they're trying to just get Dillon in there and pound him in, and teams will just key in on that. They'll load the box and they'll
Yeah.
make it so he can't physically force his way in.
Yeah, I don't
And
know if I
so I
like that
think
strategy either because I feel like Aaron Jones is so much more dynamic, right? You just put him in the backfield, and then basically, let's say you want to check out of it, you have Aaron Jones right in the backfield to pass it whenever you need to. I don't. What's the point of it? Force feeding your the run down the middle, right down their throat. So I definitely agree with that. So
And to just quickly touch on your earlier comment of the fact that Dillon has more carries than Jones, I
mhm.
think that was actually the case last year, and I think Jones might have missed a game or two to kind of skew that. But I don't mind that in like as it on its on a standalone thing,
In a
especially
vacuum,
if Dillon's getting most of his carries between the 20s. But I think
gotcha.
it's not so much the number of touches for Jones, which I think it
Mhm,
still needs to go up, but it's the quality of those touches. Get him more
mhm.
targets, get him more touches near the goal line. If
And
you
I
do
agree.
that, you don't have to give him 20 carries a game.
And I agree. Also, carries and touches are different, right? So maybe AJ Dillon gets more carries, but then Aaron Jones gets more touches. It could throw in the ball a lot more often too. I definitely think they should deploy him more. So I agree with that.
It's basically equal, right? Because Aaron Jones has 17 catches, Dillon is 13. Like, and
Okay.
I think the one thing is they're both good in pass protection, so you can kind of trust either. And I do like that. Like, I don't think you can't throw to AJ Dillon. In fact, you should because if you always just use him on early downs, it telegraphs for the defense. So I love that they are throwing to Dillon, but they've run him on screens a couple times, and it seems like, man, that's a play where if it was Jones, he would have had the burst to cut open. And instead, Dillon, he gets a few yards, but he gets tackled and can't power through it. It's not the first down, but it's like you run Jones on that screen out there, and he's got the blocks. He could probably get that first down. So it's
Yeah.
kind of again, you could throw to Dillon, but maybe like how you're designing plays for Jones. Like they really need to specify the offense to design plays to get him open. Again, I guess we can move over to the Washington offense. It seems like that's what they've done this year with Curtis Samuel. They're designing him ways to get open. Whereas they'll let McLaurin go downfield and he'll make the tougher catches if once he's targeted, which is why
Originally, and we'll talk. Like, I'll give you some time to ask some Washington features as well. We definitely so the first 4 weeks of the year, Scott Turner was definitely more dynamic and more interesting with the way he would deploy Curtis Samuel. Like he'd have like a diamond formation in the backfield, hand the ball off to Curtis Samuel, have him run wheel routes over the backfield, just deploy him everywhere. And like actually, it's funny. Like up until this point, Curtis Samuel was the most heavily targeted wide receiver on the team, and I think it's just Carson Wentz kind of felt comfortable with him, and there definitely was a dynamic there. So first couple of weeks is always throw it to Curtis Samuel, then red zone would be to Jahan Dotson, who actually had 4 touchdowns in like 3 or 4, like 4 games or something. He had a high touchdown rate. I think it's going to kind of skew differently though now with Taylor Heineke because Taylor Heineke has been playing with Terry McLaurin. Believe it or not, Terry McLaurin's had I think Terry McLaurin's had like 10 touchdowns. Or sorry, 9 or 10 different quarterbacks throw him the ball in his short 5-year career or 4-year career, excuse me. And basically, Taylor Heineke's played 13 games with him. He's the most familiar with all the quarterbacks is Taylor Heineke. So I'd expect Taylor Heineke to force feed Terry McLaurin a lot this week, and it's going to be interesting. I think Carson Wentz is more of a physically has higher upside, more talented than Taylor Heineke. But I think Taylor Heineke's knowledge and his experience in the offense is going to make it more efficient because it was a poor marriage from the very first week. It was like our offensive line has got the best offensive line. There's definitely some weaknesses on the interior. We could talk about that later. And then Carson Wentz has a propensity to hold on the ball, right? So we have a weak offensive line. We have Carson Wentz who can't scramble out of the pocket, and he's holding on to the ball, and he's getting sacked at the highest rate, like 21 sacks through 6 games. I think it's actually the worst in the NFL. Taylor Heineke is more mobile. Taylor Heineke can throw on script. I think he's going to force feed Taylor McLaurin. So it's gonna be like, it's funny. Like, it's the talk in DC is that no one gets excited when the backup quarterback comes in, except for Washington. Washington's actually pretty excited to see this new backup quarterback and see what happens, and it's going to be interesting. So we'll see how it goes. But before we get there, let's kind of talk about the Green Bay's defense. I mean, kind of get back more into the matchup. So Joe Barry, we're very familiar with him in DC. We kind of ran him out of DC. We didn't really love him over here, but how's it going over there? How you describe the scheme, the pressure rates? How would you describe the Packers defense and your affliction or your love of Joe Barry over there?
Well, and it's the big complaint about the coaching staff, I think, has been. I mean, I have other complaints about like Matt LaFleur decision making. I think like when they decided to go to London, they flew on the Friday to play a Sunday game less than 48 hours later, and I see like Rodgers was very vocal.
Yeah, he didn't like that.
No, he wanted to go earlier. I said it. Like I remember talking about it on the reaction episode the week before, and then that Giants preview game. Why didn't they go Tuesday? Why didn't they go Tuesday, practice the whole week there? Like that. Yeah. That to me is what teams should do. Now the Giants didn't either, and I think that was one of the pushbacks Jesse made. Who really he blamed Rodgers a lot more. I kind of blame the coaching staff because I didn't love the calls they made, and this team has been much worse in the second half. And it seems like this coaching staff on both sides of the ball aren't adjusting at all. And I think it was really most evident on defense last week. The Packers actually, I mean, they held the Jets to 3 points going into halftime. It's 3-3 at halftime. And one of the things that the Jets really adjusted to start running to the outside. And they started a lot more stretch zone runs and getting Breece Hall in space that way. And the Packers had no answer for that. And part of that is player execution, because one of the things, Rashawn Gary, he was a 12th overall pick a couple years ago, great pass rusher. He's probably their best pass rusher, sack accumulator. He has a tendency, and this has been there his whole career. He's gotten better in the run gap discipline, but when it comes to rushing the passer, he collapses down far too often, and it leaves. I think one of the things that happened last year was Heineke ended up with a lot of rushing yards, if I'm not mistaken, against the Packers.
90 yards,
partially because of that, because Gary crashes that edge so much that it lets quarterbacks get out in space. And what happened in the run game is they would just run his direction that way, and he would try to collapse in on Breece Hall, and Hall's just so fast and so great that he would get to the outside and then big run. And so that was, they needed to kind of adjust where they were placing players on the field too, but also the scheme. But again, part of it comes down to the players themselves executing. So I think it's a mix of both, but it seems like the Jets made a lot of adjustments on both sides of the ball in the game, and the Packers didn't at all. And then it turned out, the Packers finally did score a touchdown in the second half. So I guess offensively they started to maybe play better, but the defense certainly played a lot worse. They allowed 24 points in the second half and a ton of rushing yards, especially. So that, in that sense, the one thing that I guess defensively does worry me about this Washington offense is, man, if they ever decide to use Antonio Gibson a ton, he's the kind of runner, because I do really like Brian Robinson. It seems like Washington does as well.
Yeah, they do.
They've immediately, okay, you're the starter immediately, right? For your first game. It's you're clearly ahead of Gibson in terms of the number of carries you're going to get. But it seems like he's a good inside runner, power, not so much to the stretch zone that could really expose the Packers defense. So that would be one where if they ever decided to adjust how they're using the two running backs based on the opponent, this would seem like it should be a heavy Antonio Gibson game. And that would be kind of the big worry and fear, or using Curtis Samuel to a certain extent in that way.
I'll be really surprised. So let's touch on that real quick. So I think the reason why Washington deploys Brian Robinson more is because they want to be in positive game script. And I think Washington's offense has been so inefficient all year long. Having a loss of 5 or having a false start penalty or anything like that just digs them into a hole. And Washington is just struggling to create anything. So if it's like 1st and 15 and then we have to throw the ball, legitimately like 20% of the time it'll become a sack. We try to drop back. So it's like you can't necessarily have that negative game script. So they like Brian Robinson because he can fall forward. He is more decisive. Antonio Gibson is definitely more explosive, but I think you nailed it, right? Brian Robinson is that standard Alabama running back where he sees a hole. He's more refined. He'll run forward. He'll fall for 4 yards, maybe hit an 18-yard gain or something like that. But that's what we're looking for there. Antonio Gibson can hit that home run, but it's few and far between. We haven't seen that in a long time, and quite often he I think from the coaching level, like Randy Jordan, our running back coach, gets frustrated with Antonio Gibson because there will be holes there, and because of the hesitation or even the accelerated mindset. Like, if you are more patient with the run, there will be a hole, but he'll just kind of run into a guard's back and things like that. So long story short, Gibson has been kind of inefficient as a running back. So I'd be surprised if they start deploying him more, but at the same time, what Washington has is they do have talent. I'm not gonna lie. I think they do have Antonio Gibson's pretty solid, Brian Robinson's pretty solid, and then also JD McKissick's pretty solid. So you might be thinking Antonio Gibson might be the running back that runs that little like wide after the tackle, but honestly, it might be JD McKissick. It might really might be him because like they might have this whole like shotgun wide receiver, running back offset formation, and then McKissick be slashing them, and like I do think he has the ability to do so. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be like I think our offense is going to be more of like a West Coast, like just kind of like nipping and tucking and kind of taking little short passes and then trying to move the ball with Heineke and our running back. So we'll see if that actually works well against Green Bay. So we'll see what happens.
Funny, it's almost what Green Bay's asked for, the simplified offense, right? You're changing quarterbacks. Okay, let's simplify things, which again would then, like to your credit, lead to a lot more Brian Robinson. Let's just plow forward on first down or early downs, and let's try and just get some, set ourselves up to be in good third down situations, or it's not going to be third and super long, and you can let a guy like Gary just kind of let loose and get after. I guess with Washington, but I guess and run game, and for any team, it's all about the offensive line. So I mentioned with the Packers, the strength is really to the outside, the tackles and the interiors maybe where the weak points. How would you kind of characterize the Washington line? You already kind of referenced like their sack rates down there with the Bears. Like I think they're 31st.
It really is. It really is down there with the Bears.
So like those are two offenses. And I think part of the reason the Bears sack rate is so high is they're just not throwing very much. So anytime they do take a sack, it skews that percentage. But yeah, the Washington's volume's up there too. So it's
so it's crazy. So obviously I have the offensive line put up for our listeners and our viewers as well. So the way it works is like left tackle Charles Leno, he came over from the Bears. He's like a solid left tackle. He is not gonna, give up too much. He's not necessarily dynamic. We're coming from Trent Williams, where like, our left tackle is like running on like screen passes, like 20 yards on the field. He's not that at all. He's definitely a steady Eddie at that position. He's 10th in PFF. He's doing a good job there. Our weakest portion is our interior offensive line. Andrew Norwell came from Carolina. He's our left guard. He's really struggled. He it might have been last game or the game before where he like offsides, holding, and he had a false start, a holding, and gave up a sack in 3 consecutive plays, just destroyed a drive. Like he is not efficient at all, and he hasn't been playing very well at all. So that's definitely an area to exploit for Green Bay. Tyler Larson may be coming back. We have Chase Rouillet as our starting center. He's actually pretty good. He actually earned a second contract with us from Washington. So, we actually wanted to invest and kind of build around him. He wasn't necessarily the most athletic center in the world, but I mean, in Washington, most pro teams, the center calls the protections for the whole entire line, right? So Chase Rouillet would call the protections for Washington. Very heady player, efficient, didn't necessarily give up anything. But he he had an aggravated foot last year. I think he might have a torn Achilles last year, and then he broke his ankle or something first week this year. So he's been out. And then the backup center also got a concussion. So we're in our third center as well. So we're looking at left guard and center being a weak point, right? Then you can pivot over to right guard. Ron Rivera, this is his criticism. We'll talk during the offseason, Kyle, but Ron Rivera definitely pulled over a lot of Panther, holdovers and retreads over to Washington. Trey Turner, I'm sure you're familiar with him, was a, 31-year-old, 32-year-old guard. They brought him over to play right guard. He had a quad injury. he basically missed all of training camp. And then Ron Rivera kind of like, I think kind of arrogantly thought that he'd be ready by week 1. Like, he's a veteran, he can kind of come in and play, and he just got eaten up in the first couple games. So they actually benched Trey Turner, and Sadiq Charles, a former LSU left tackle, is playing at right guard. And he's doing a pretty good job, admirable job, doing pretty solid. He's athletic as hell, so he actually like he's a raw prospect. Like, he'll give up a pretty bad sack, or he'll give up like a bad play, but then again, he'll like also run down the field and like pancake somebody. So he's very volatile with him. And then Cornelius Lucas is our swing tackle. So what may happen, we'll see what actually happens, because Cornelius Lucas is a pretty decent, but we have a second round pick named Sam Cosby from Texas. He was a great like run. He's known for being a run blocking right tackle, and he can actually move. He had like a 99.9 like RAS score. It was like ridiculous, like off the charts, like 40 and things like that. So like he might actually come back this week. So the talk is, and it's kind of controversial, but it's kind of like it's bubbling up, is Sam Cosmi is pretty damn athletic. Cornelius Lucas is a pretty solid right tackle. Maybe throw Cosby in our right guard and let kind of solidify the interior of the offensive line, and let him kind of be that like the bulldozer in the interior of the line. But like that, it might not be something you do during the middle of the season. It might not be something that Sam Cosby wants to do, because there's a pay difference as well. So that's kind of the talk. But truly, rolling out this lineup that you're looking at right now, I think it's looking in the mirror between you and the Packers, right? It's like our tackles are decent, they're solid, they can kind of hold it down. Our interior can be exploited, in our opinion. So that's kind of where I'm at. So we'll see. And I know you guys have some, you guys have what, Jaron Reed, you guys have who else? You have an awesome stud too. I forget his name right now. Who's your nose tackle, or your 3 technique, the defensive tackle?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Kenny Clark.
Oh yeah, Kenny Clark. I forgot about him. Kenny Clark's a beast too. So
and that was kind of what I was going to say. That like in terms of the opponent, if they really wanted to get Cosby in, and that's a tough maybe first assignment if he ends up against Clark. But if that's also where they think the highest upside is, and I suppose from his perspective, I mean, you're on your rookie contract, right? So for him, he's what you do during your rookie contract, especially early on in it, like that big payday for a tackle might still be there. You could start at guard, and then eventually year 2, year 3, get a tackle. That's probably not so much. He might be more just thinking, how do I get on the field? And maybe some players just want to play tackle, but there's also some that however I can get on the field earlier and play is I'll play that position, right? So I guess that we don't know his thoughts and how that's be, but it might be a good week to do it for that if you think you really want to get him in there. But it could be a tough assignment with Clark, but I think as much as Jaron Reed, he also maybe had a disappointing game last week as well. I think the defense, again, as a whole kind of struggled. And maybe you asked earlier about the Joe Barry scheme. And I know, I guess for the run part of it, it seemed like that was more just execution. I think that the big questions you've had with Barry's scheme have been more like with the coverages in the secondary. And we can touch on that a little later. But to me, the most important player, regardless of Joe Barry's scheme, is Kenny Clark for the defense. And what I've noticed through the years is the times the Packers have the most success on defense is against the teams that have to double team Kenny Clark constantly. If they've got usually a center that can't handle him one-on-one for most snaps, and he's just bull rushing through on a guy right up the A gap every time, they have to double team him, that's what's going to open things up for everyone else. So when the Packers defense has really struggled to get pressure is when they face, that's why the Vikings like recently actually do match up well against the Packers, because their center Bradbury is pretty good. And like the last couple of years, what they've done is you're one-on-one on Clark, and that's like they don't have to worry about everyone else. They can double the edges, and they can really draw extra attention to Rashawn Gary or to Preston Smith at the other side, because both those are good at getting after the quarterback. So I guess with Washington, it's going to depend. You said, unfortunately, going back down to your third string center, that's probably not someone that can handle Clark one-on-one. But the other thing that I've noticed in recent weeks too is they're moving Clark around. Like I can't remember what game it was. I think it was last week against the Jets. He ended up one-on-one against all 5 offensive linemen at one point. Like they made kind of a conscious effort to move him around, not just play the nose tackle, playing defensive end at times. And so that's also something that it seems like they'll do to kind of scheme him open. And so I guess it depends. Like, so if they might start him out on the inside and see how does Washington approach. Do they double team him a lot? If so, okay, then we'll move him around to kind of avoid that, or maybe they want to draw that in. And so we'll see kind of how they go about it, because Adam Stenavich, who used to be the offensive line coach, is now the offensive coordinator. So while it's still Matt LaFleur's play calling, Matt LaFleur's offense, there's more input from the offensive line perspective than maybe had been in the past, that he's taken over for Nathaniel Hackett. And Nathaniel Hackett comes more from the QB coach side of things than he does from the offensive line coach side of things. So which I suppose, I guess that's where Matt LaFleur kind of did as well. So the emphasis really from the quarterback's perspective. And maybe that's part of the philosophy too, is Stenavich taking over as offensive coordinator. Maybe he wants to instill more running for them. And that's maybe where also that's coming. It's maybe not just a LaFleur Rodgers thing, but it's maybe a Stenavich Rodgers thing that we're really not hearing about.
Offensive line coach, right? He's offensive line coach prior to this.
Yeah, exactly. And they've promoted him this year with Hackett leaving. So anyway, but we were talking defense. So to go back to your question about Joe Barry way back when, I'm finally answering it. Schematically, the one complaint, certainly against that Vikings game week 1, was how much zone coverage they were giving to Justin Jefferson. He would just eat it alive. Like they really need to. They've invested in these cornerbacks, whether it's first round picks in Jair Alexander and Eric Stokes, and a contract of Rasul Douglas that almost makes the fact that they missed out on William Jackson last year, but were able to snag Rasul Douglas off the Carol. I think he started the year with the Panthers, but then ended up getting cut, going to the Cardinals practice squad, and the Packers poached him off the practice squad when Jair Alexander got hurt. And that was fun because his first game was against the Cardinals, and he got
I love it when that happens.
And he got an interception at the end to win it for them. But anyway, that was a fun story. But having those 3 corners, you've got players that can cover man on man against most receivers in the league. So that's going to be interesting to see how they approach. Because last week, what they did was thinking, okay, Garrett Wilson was kind of, from the passing game perspective, the one to worry the most about. I think the biggest worry was Breece Hall, and it showed, and they really clearly weren't ready for it. But what they did is Garrett Wilson played primarily out of the slot, and they moved Jair Alexander to play in the nickel as a nickel corner a lot more. And Garrett Wilson had 1 catch. Like he really just shut him down. And so they're going to get into that idea of the shutdown corner with Alexander, and he might shadow, but especially if they can single out a player that's maybe going to get a lot of targets out of the slot, which comes back to the Curtis Samuel question, is where he's been playing a lot this year. Has it been in the slot?
Yeah, he has. So he's been playing more so. Like, well, it's funny. They kind of interchangeable. It's like he will play in the backfield. When Jahan Dotson is in, Jahan Dotson's primarily a slot, but they do vary it. It's more of a mixture. It isn't like he isn't our true slot wide receiver. So we'll see how it plays out. I mean, we'll see how it goes this week because Jahan Dotson is supposedly out. So and the way it should work, the way I'm kind of projecting is Diami Brown's going to be out this week. So Terry McClure is going to be our X. Maybe Cam Sims will probably be our other boundary. He's like a big 6'4" wide receiver. They'll probably put Curtis Samuel in the slot because of that, because that guy can play in the slot. So we'll see how that goes. But
okay, then from that perspective, I could see them saying, okay, let's use Alexander. We'll keep him in the slot to shut down Samuel. But I think the other reason he's so good at sideline to sideline tackling, like one of the best corners at it. He's also so great in coverage. That's what makes Jair Alexander. I mean, they just paid him this offseason.
He's having a monster year, right? He's having just a great, like from the outside perspective, like he's killing it right now, right? That's what I thought.
I mean, technically he was the corner in coverage on one of Justin Jefferson's big catches week 1. That was also really great play design by the Vikings. They almost rub route, like almost like a pick route, but they ran a crosser kind of against, because they were playing zone against Justin Jefferson. They weren't having Jair Alexander go up and press him. He was kind of having to make up a lot of ground to get to him, and it was like you had a deeper cross, and then Jefferson on a shallower cross, and where that other crossing route came, it kind of got right in Alexander's way as the catches he made, and that's why Jefferson was so wide open on that play. And I think, okay, they've realized they have to get him up to the line of scrimmage more, and that will also allow him to help in the run game more as well. And if he's playing the slot, he can get to the either sideline a little quicker than he can from obviously if he's on the one boundary, he can get to that sideline quick, but if he needs to help out on either on a run or a short reception that he can help out tackle wise on the other sideline, he has less ground to cover there as well. So I think part of it is trying to get him to the middle of the action more. So he's not just a great cover corner, he's also a great physically tackling corner. So maybe allow him to help more in the run game as well, Matt. So I could see them redeploying that type of thing, and he'll just spend most time on Curtis Samuel, especially if he plays a lot in the slot.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it right now just to kind of solidify that. So Curtis Samuel's actually played a lot in the slot, believe it or not. He played about, I think it's looking at PFF for the season, 70%. I think it's definitely skewed up a lot because Jahan Dotson's been out the past couple games, but he played in the slot 70% of the time. So Yeah, I'll be interested.
And then that'll be interesting to see, like, do they want Douglas on McLaurin or Stokes on McLaurin? They might also, okay, you just keep each of you on your side, and whoever gets
Yeah.
McLaurin kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe.
Knowing McLaurin's just, it's funny because he's good as a deep catch guy.
Hmm.
It seems like McLaurin is, but he's also good as a contested catch guy. For a
Yeah.
contested catch corner, you'd want Douglas. He's a little taller. He can maybe, former safety, so really physical as well.
Hmm.
Stokes, you'd want him on the deep threats because he's so fast. And even if he gets burned, he's so fast that that's happened times where he's a receiver's gotten open. He can kind of make up the difference and re-catch up to them and at least be in the area to impact the catcher, be ready to make a tackle if the reception's made. So I suppose either way, like, there's certain weaknesses to both corners' game that McLaurin could exploit. So
Hmm.
you're almost, it's tough to know which way to go, right? So you might just say we'll simplify that again and leave each corner on their side. Whoever gets McLaurin on that play, kind of thing. So I could
I
see them
agree.
kind of, and that might be maybe the breakout game for McLaurin. I know we were talking about that on the
Yeah.
Full Press Fantasy Pod. My co-host my co-host Brad on that show, he's got McLaurin higher than Curtis Samuel in the rankings. I have Samuel higher, but talking about the Alexander coverage, maybe that is making me rethink it, and maybe he was right. Maybe I should have McLaurin higher.
I think the ideal game script for Washington would be to establish the run, feed McLaurin, and kind of move the ball down the field, and hopefully get a play action big shot of what they want to do. But we'll see what happens. If Jair Alexander covers McLaurin, that's going to be kind of a. I think that might tip the favor of the backers. We'll see how that goes. So let's bring it on home. So we're coming back to about an hour. I'll keep my shows to about an hour. So let's kind of talk about game predictions. So how are you feeling about this game? Do you feel confident? Do you think that the Packers are going to win? And if you're feeling bold, maybe a score prediction.
Yeah. So again, I think one of the things I talked about was the fact that this seems like a must-win for the Packers, and maybe through desperation comes inspiration, and they kind of make the offense click just because they know they have to in this game.
Yeah.
I could also maybe see the defense really being able to shut down Washington, especially if their run scheme is going to be so based on Brian Robinson.
Hmm.
That's a lot easier of an assignment than it has been the last 2 weeks with Brees Hall and Saquon Barkley. I mean,
Yeah.
even if it is Gibson to the types of runs that the Packers are weak against, the outside runs, that's
Yeah.
still, I like Gibson, but he's not where
Yeah. It's not there
Barkley is,
yet.
and certainly what it seems like where Brees Hall is too as a rookie. So
Yeah.
in that sense, it'll be easier, I guess, against the run game for them. So I think the Packers will win. I don't really see a blow. I don't think the Packers, the way they played this year, you can confidently go into any week and say that they're going to blow this team out anymore. So I'd expect a closer game. I think looking at kind of where the odds makers have it, I think they're right on and pretty close.
Hmm.
Um, I think from what I last look at the implied totals, the Packers were at around 23 and Washington just under 18 points. So
Mm.
I could maybe see both teams failing to kind of hit those marks just with maybe how both offenses have been struggling. Maybe this is a good game for both defenses to reestablish themselves. So I think it'll be something like 21-14, kind of
Hmm.
a standard score there. 3 touchdowns for one team, 2 for the other. The team that gets 3 wins, right? So I'll say Packers win 21-14.
We'll see how it goes. I'm going to be live in attendance, so hopefully Washington can kind of hold it down. I do think it's going to be like that as well. I think it's going to be a pretty close game. I think Washington might drop this one. I think the Packers might win by like about 10. I do think our defense has come a long way. Jack Del Rio started off the season not necessarily being in the best of favor of our fan base. There's a lot of big plays given up. I think the first couple games of the season, he gave up like the most 40-yard plays across the entire NFL. But now we kind of stabilized, and our defense has been kind of tight. Even going back to the Eagles game, we were down 24-0 at the half. Actually, we were down pretty quickly, but then we recovered in the second half and kind of found our groove after that. And I think after we benched William Jackson, it's been pretty nip and tucking since then. So we'll see how that goes. But Kyle, before we wrap it on up, is there any last minute questions you want to ask about the Commanders or anything like that before we kind of tie a bow on it?
Well, if you're saying like that, especially offensively, they get better in the second half, that kind of works again against the Packers' favor, who seems like their defense has been much better in the second half or in the first half than they have been in the second half, where they've again seems like it's failing to adjust. So I think it does come down to coaching, and maybe Rivera and Del Rio can kind of come up with a defensive game plan to slow down what the Packers have. And if so, can Heineke work against this Barry defense that seems like it'll throw a lot at you, but once you figure it out, they're going to just keep throwing the same things over and over again. So
It's going to be interesting.
There,
Like I
there's
think.
there are certainly keys to and ways that Washington could win this game. So Packers have to be wary for it again. I think that at this point, and from this point on, the Packers can't really look at any opponent as, oh, we got this. Because they haven't shown that they've been able to. We've got this against the teams that maybe they should.
Yeah,
and maybe it does start with Washington. Like, yeah, this is a team below 500. If it again heavy favorite, I think the Packers are double-digit favorites on the road. So like you're saying, you're kind of expecting a 10-point win. That seems what everyone's expecting. But I guess the Packers have to earn that they deserve to be expected to do that.
I want to be more confident in Washington. However, that we won against the Bears last week. But for those that actually watch that Thursday night football game, there's nothing to there's no medals of honor or courage after walking away from that game. It was definitely an ugly game. We could have lost if if they actually held on the ball at the end. So
both defenses, box score wise, look amazing. But it seemed like it wasn't so much that the defenses were doing well. Like neither offense could execute. Like get into spots and just couldn't. Like it seemed like the Bears, especially, like they were getting to the red zone and then just couldn't complete it, and going on fourth down, turning it over, and just not executing on the plays more than the defense really standing out.
Objective reflection. I'm always the honest I try to be as objective and honest as I can. The Bears lost the game as opposed to Washington winning the game, in my opinion. There definitely was they got down in the red zone, threw a bad interception, got down to the end zone, couldn't execute in time. There's a muff punt that led to Washington scoring their only touchdown of the game. So there really isn't anything to gloat about or talk about. But the one optimistic thing to look at is getting Heineke in there. I think Scott Turner is going to feel more comfortable, and I think he's going to basically refer to his playbook from last year. And Heineke, what did you like last year? Let's do it. So I do expect the offense to be more efficient. We'll see how that goes. We'll see. Our defense has been playing well. So if the Packers' offense is struggling and the Commanders' defense is playing better, then that's actually a good combination for Washington. And I do think that Washington's offense will be more efficient. They'll move the ball more quickly. The only thing that I'm worried about is Taylor Heineke has a propensity to turn the ball over. He had 15 interceptions last year, and he does fumble the ball. So he had 15 interceptions in 15 games last year, and that's not even counting the fumbles. And then he has a lack of big plays. He's more of an efficient kind of nip and tuck kind of player. He's not going to be one of the catch. Yeah, yards after the catch kind of guy. He's not going to be one of like those. He's the antithesis of Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz would basically, he'd have like this huge deep throws, and he wouldn't check underneath. But Heineke is the opposite. But maybe that's what Washington needs, and maybe it's going to be kind of interesting going against Green Bay. They have last year's Heineke's film, but no one really knows what's coming this week. So maybe just kind of catching them off guard might be something. So we'll see.
And I think back to Heineke last year, one of his big wins, his winning touchdown to J.D. McKissick was like, okay, McKissick kind of did it a bunch after the catch, and he found the way to find the pylon. That was really impressive for the running back, but that was a 5-yard throw. Right? But exactly. But that's sometimes, and maybe sometimes that's what it takes to win, though, right? So within knowing, maybe does make a good game for Curtis Samuel in that sense, because I guess that's one thing is Heineke didn't really have much of Samuel last year with the injury, so he hasn't got, as much as he's got a connection with McLaurin, he also hasn't
maybe his most talented group
much either.
That's true, especially if Jahan Dotson comes back. So awesome. So Kyle, awesome insight. I learned a lot this game. Hopefully you enjoy the game tomorrow. Hopefully Washington wins. We'll see how it actually goes. But before we kind of wrap it up, Kyle, tell us what kind of products you're working on right now. Where can they find you on social media and what's going on?
So you can check out a few of my articles on Full Press Coverage. A lot of it is fantasy football based for the articles. So I do a weekly goal line guide, and I look at every team. I provide what I call a goal line grade for them, for each team, both rushing and passing. And it's kind of just where I think, predicting where the touchdowns will come from. A lot of it's based on usage for teams and efficiency from teams inside the 5-yard line, both offensively, but also defensively. So I am looking at the matchups and kind of trying to fuse everything together to create these grades. So I find it's one of the few things I could kind of contribute fantasy wise that no one else was really doing. So I thought this was a perfect way to track for myself and my own fantasy teams, but also then share with everyone. So you can find that on fullpresscoverage.com. Every Sunday, I host a Full Press Fantasy Sunday Live. We start at 11:30 a.m. Eastern on the days where George isn't watching the Commanders at home, at home games, meaning he'll be on with me. So this is a week where George won't be there because he'll be, rooting against the Packers actively. So check out George every couple weeks. Seems like the Washington schedule does kind of alternate, basically home road. So it will almost work out perfectly to be every 2 weeks. But I'll be there again, 11:30 a.m. Eastern on the Full Press Coverage YouTube network. So check out, if you're watching on YouTube right now, just same channel tomorrow, almost a little less than 24 hours to go away. But Also, I'm part of the Going for Two live network. We do live streams. I'm part of a live stream every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So we go kind of a preview for the Monday game, but we also have Dr. James Ferretti on, radiologist by trade, and he talks a lot about the injuries, kind
That's
of
awesome.
on stuff that's occurred on the Sunday, but it could also be stuff from lingering weeks and just kind of expectation for players when we're expecting them to go out and kind of how you react fantasy wise. And one of the things the doc does really well is reading between the lines on when the coaches are saying stuff, but they're not saying things, but like what they're omitting or the details they're omitting or key things in it. He does a really good job at guessing. And you see some fantasy football analysts that are doctors, they'll try and look more at the tape. Okay, this is what I think the mechanism is based on the injury. I think Doc, again, he's a radiologist, so he looks more at imaging more than anything else. So he's not necessarily looking at the mechanisms, but what are the coaches saying? What information's available? And he does a really good job, I think, gleaming tons of information from little information. He can kind of read between the lines.
That's awesome. I didn't know you didn't do that, Kyle. I want to check that out. That's awesome. It's really cool.
Yeah. So, so Doc's fantastic. I've got Gladys and Dan. The B League says they're also co-hosts. So the four of us, we just we'll do props and pick the Monday games, but we also do give a lot of time to Doc to talk about those injuries and so that's a lot of fun and I think helpful to a lot of listeners. So again, as George mentioned earlier, full press coverage Packers. Obviously, talking about the Packers at FPC_Packers on Twitter. We've got a podcast. My co-host Jesse Hall and I, we try to do 2 episodes a week, usually previewing the game and then reacting to it afterwards. Then also Full Press Fantasy Pod. My co-host Brad Harvin on Twitter at FPC_FantasyPod. In season, that's usually once a week where we'll do kind of weekly ranking debates going into the week, kind of which players should we start, which shouldn't, and we'll kind of discuss where our biggest differences are in our rankings usually. And our biggest difference this week is actually Michael Gallup, so an NFC East opponent for you. And so one of the things we do every week is our biggest difference. We'll put it on Twitter as well and let people vote in the poll. So I've got him at wide receiver 22 in half-point PPR scoring. Brad has him down at wide receiver 40. So if you want to, again, check out the pinned tweet at FPC_FantasyPod. The poll's in there, and you can let us know what you think. And appreciate George for having me on and appreciate all the interactions we get.
Of course, man, 100%. That's awesome. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate it. As you guys know, I'm George Carmi at GCarmi21. I also write for Full Press Coverage. I have a Taylor Heineke, Dan Snyder piece coming out later on today, so we're going to talk about that. I've had a great time. I'm host of the Full Press Commanders podcast, and I really enjoyed having Kyle on. And as you heard, bi-weekly, I jump on his fantasy podcast on Sunday mornings to talk about starting and sitting them. Kyle's great at that, has an awesome insight, so definitely check it out tomorrow at 11:30. Everyone else, have a great day. Enjoy your Saturday. Enjoy your weekend. Peace.